Hello, everyone, and welcome to Black Paper. My name is Ndukwe Onoha.
And I'm Chetawanze.
Right, so let's get back to it. And first of all, before we start, welcome back, Cheta. You're a man of many airports.
Thank you. If you can give me a job that will keep me in one place, I'll be very happy.
I'm not even sure that even you will. I mean, ever since I've known you, you've been the one to just junket around the globe. And
You get to a certain point, you're looking at your children and you want to be with them as much of the time as you can be.
well, true, well, true, well, true. Right, so on this episode, we'll be talking about something that caught our eyes in the news a few days ago, which was the conversation around 5 years later after the Black Lives Matter protest that rocked the UK. Now, for those who, for some reason, may not know, in the summer of 2020, following the murder of George Floyd in the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement sparked a wave of global protests. And of course, even in the UK, there were protests. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets across the UK and London, places like London, Bristol, Manchester, Glasgow. People were on the streets demanding justice for Black Britons who had been facing institutional racism. And as you can...
Statues into the river.
Sorry?
And throwing statues into the river.
And throwing out, well, we'll get to that. But as you can tell, or rather, as was expected, this wave showed yet again not just the issues that people were facing, but almost like clockwork, people came out. There was righteous indignation. How dare this country be, treating people like this? We're going to do something. People took the knee. There were letters of solidarity. Everyone was fired up, and then the steam died.
And then 5 years later,
we
have this investigation from The Guardian that basically says only a third of the recommendations from the major reports into racial inequality in the UK over the past 4 decades have ever been implemented.
And the UK is not short of recommendations.
The UK does inquiries very well.
Very. It's almost like Nigeria. You know how they say, when in doubt, set up a committee, or there's a committee for everything in Nigeria. And
please, let's not. Nigeria and the UK are not in the same WhatsApp group when it comes to
no, but maybe when
committees.
No, but when it comes to committees and reports and investigations, maybe somebody's inspiring another person. Because think about it, 4 decades. There was a Scarman report in 1981 after the Brixton riots, Macpherson report, Lamy review, Windrush lessons learned review. 4 decades, 600 recommendations, only a third. Definitely, if they're not in the same WhatsApp group, they might be in the same.
Yeah, so I would like to look at it this way. I think the most seminal report that we've done in Nigeria is the Oronsaye reports. How many of the recommendations have been implemented today, 16 years later, which is half the time?
So there's still time.
Let's get real here. I think the last time that a report was recommended was in Nigeria that a seminal report was done and the recommendations were followed through. Was the Udoji reports that led to the Udoji Awards in mid-70s. This is before me and you came on the scene. It's not the same WhatsApp group. There's plenty of time to compare Nigeria to the UK in this.
Which is why I'm saying it might not be the same WhatsApp group, but it might be same Signal group or Telegram.
No, it's not.
Or something.
It's not. We're not using the same phone. One is using a Samsung S25. The other one is using a Nokia 3310, vintage 1998.
Oh man, don't take me back, man. I love that phone. That phone was.
It was a real deal. If somebody annoys you, you could use it to slap the person. It scatters. You put it together again and continue receiving your calls.
Yeah, but now just back to the issue at hand. Is Britain a country of fads? Is this a place where people get upset about something only as long as it's fashionable and then just move on?
I think yes, in many respects, that's a part of it. But at the end of the day, I think that's a very human thing. People tend to want to do something in the moment, and people tend to there's something called the bandwagon effect, and it's very real. So when you have the bandwagon effect, people jump on a fad, jump on something, want to be seen doing something, especially liberal voices. I think one of my favorite songs is the Phil Oak song from the 60s, Love Me, I'm a Liberal, because it talks a lot about liberal hypocrisy. But the truth of the matter is, when you look at a lot of things happening in the world right now, People talk, so when we talk of things like Gaza, when you talk of all of that, there was something that the young man who self-immolated in the US said before he self-immolated, which is, you now have the answer, you that is watching this, of what you would have done if you were around during the era of slavery. And it's very similar to this. Most people will want to talk from the comfort of their homes, or in the social media age from the comfort of their Twitter feeds or their Facebook groups. But to lift a finger to do something, no. And if you want to keep it a bunch, that may include both of us. It's easy to talk. It's easy to talk the talk, but when it is time to walk the walk, that's much harder. And especially given that walking the walk often comes at a very personal cost. So when you think about, for example, in the UK, coming back to the UK, you talk about things like the murder of Stephen Lawrence, you talk about things like the Windrush crowd. They show that systemic racism persists across policing, healthcare, education, employment, or pretty much along the whole gamut of life in
Oh,
the
don't
UK.
tell the government that.
Well,
I mean, I remember
you are in the
Boris.
government, so
I,
I'm
I
telling
remember. I
you.
remember. I remember Boris Johnson's vehement refusal of the idea that there could be systemic racism in any part of British life.
So here is where I will I think that the truth is very nuanced. It's a lot more nuanced than that. I think that generally the UK has handled race better than many other countries, the US, most European countries. I think that our sister, the leader of the Tories, was quite correct. There was something she said, I think, towards the end of 2023, when she said the UK is probably the best country in the world to be a black person. It might not be absolutely true, but there is some element of truth to it. The UK's main problem, really, and this is not to deny that there's a racial problem, there's definitely a racial problem. But the UK's main problem, from my point of view, is mainly class. So, in terms of racial mixing, you walk around in the UK, you see more mixed race kids than you see in pretty much any other European country. I've been to quite a few. You see more mixed race kids in the UK than I've noticed in the US. I see more mixed race couples in the UK than pretty much anywhere else. So there's something that the UK has gotten right in that respect, but I'm not sure if it was gotten right deliberately. I think it was gotten right because of the class system. So when the first massive wave of black people that came to the UK came after the Second World War with the Windrush generation, and they came straight into the working class. And the working class guys in the UK already tuned to the it's us working class versus the posh upper classes. So when these guys came in, of course, they had their problems. We cannot forget things like Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood or the race riots. But it was easier for them to mix because at the end of the day, all of them would go to their building sites together, carry bricks together. So I think that is the thing with the UK. But this is not to deny the realities of things like Stephen Lawrence. That was very, very egregious. And of course, the Windrush scandal. Now, I think that a lot of the BLM thing that happened here, and this I think is important to note that at the time, neither of us was here.
Mm.
I think a lot of it was a carryover from the United States. The truth of the matter is that the United States has an outsized cultural influence all over the world. And when the United States sneezes, the rest of us catch a cold. So there was a huge carryover from that. But it led to questions about the UK's role. Because when you had the transatlantic slave trade, the UK was probably the biggest facilitator. The difference between the kind of racism brought about by by the transatlantic slave trade and slavery itself, chattel slavery itself, the difference between that kind in the US and the kind UK was that the UK did a decent in quotes job of keeping the slavery away from its shores. Most of the slave owners in the UK did not interact with their slaves because they were here in the UK while most of the slaves were in the Caribbean, especially. They were slave owners, it was a distant relationship. And ultimately, the UK never got to experience the direct horrors of the slavery in itself. The people who went out to catch slaves and then transported them to the Caribbean or to the Americas, pretty much, I mean, think about the triangular slave trade. They brought people from Africa to the Americas, took raw materials from the Americas in exchange and brought them here, and then made finished products and took those finished products to Africa to exchange them for more slaves. So the slaves were not really getting here.
Yeah. So, but one can also argue that what the UK excelled at, and that America and other countries didn't catch on to, was that sleight of hand of making you think that there's really nothing to see here. So,
I agree with that.
as you've mentioned,
I agree with that.
America took the slaves and said, you know what, we're going to put them in our country. We're going to live right next to them, and we're going to just wake up every day showing you
Well,
that who the
the
master
difference was
is.
that the crops that so the two big crops that
No, no,
slaves
no.
were
I'm,
used
I'm
for.
coming. But
Okay.
the thing is, then when you look at what was branded as colonialism, again, it's that semantics. It's the sleight of words of hands, doing the maybe to a lesser degree, where making you feel like you have some agency over yourself and your government, but we're just not letting you be you. So when you see the occupation of those countries, the direct rule, or in some cases indirect rule, but still not allowing countries to have agency of themselves. We're just not going to call it slavery. We're going to call it colonialism. But at the end of the day, it's almost like half and sixpence.
No, I think it's slightly different. I think it is slightly different argument we're having here. The point I'm coming from is that in the UK itself, until the late 1940s, you never had a very large black population that was actively being oppressed on British soil. So because of that, the nature of the institutions that developed more along class rather than race, in terms of their discrimination. Whereas the oppression was in places a way that, because let's look at it from the viewpoint of a pre-industrial economy. The UK and Europe generally is resource poor, but they were able to develop technology, and they had a technological leap over the rest of the world by the middle of the 15th century, such that they were able to start exploring. Ocean going navigation gave them that advantage to go out. And then they saw a lot of land in places like the Americas, which they considered quote unquote empty, and a little genocide here, a little genocide there. They emptied the land, and then after Bartholomew de Casas recommended going to Africa to bring blacks to work the land, they started bringing our people en masse to work that land. Now, the first set of people that they tried to enslave were the natives of those lands, the Native Americans. Those ones were not susceptible to those brutal conditions, A, and B, they were very susceptible to European diseases. Africans, on the other hand, were had immunity to European diseases. And then the second set of people that they tried, especially in North America, in what became the United States, the second set of people that they tried were the people who they brought from Ireland, indentured servitude. But you see the difference between indentured servitude and what became chattel slavery was that with indentured servitude, they would work for 7 years and that's it. They become landowners or whatever. It wasn't the
It wasn't a lifelong
Yes,
experience.
they ended up creating a lifelong, and it was easy because of the shade of pigmentation. It was easy to say, oh, this person is black, he's a slave, and his descendants are slaves after him. And to keep people oppressed like that, to keep people working, you need to have a very brutal system. You need brutality. And ultimately, that brutality became systemic. It became a part of the system, such that even when the American Civil War ended in 1865, you had. So I think one of the things that we need to do is look at all of this in terms of economics. They had built an economic system that required free labor from black people in perpetuity. Then that system suddenly ended. Suddenly you have millions of black people, you don't know what to do with them. So you now change the system a bit. That's why things like Jim Crow entered into the conversation. You change the system. On paper they are free, But you look for a loophole in the 13th Amendment, which says that everybody born is a citizen and should not be enslaved except for a crime, something of that nature. I can't quote the exact words. I'm not an American constitutional scholar, but I know enough of it to so that was the loophole that was exploited. So suddenly it made sense to start imprisoning black people in large numbers. And the people who used to enforce slavery back in the day simply transmutated to the police force.
But
And
if we
okay, yeah, go on.
Mm. Yeah, but if we bring it back to the UK, because somehow we've gone across the Atlantic
It's impossible to have a Black Lives Matter conversation without going
without.
across the
Oh
Atlantic.
yeah, but if we look at how one the strength of feelings in the UK, how it was sparked by that incident involving or the murder of George Floyd, and how even going on years after that, seems that despite all the protestations, despite all the words of solidarity, despite the pictures of certain people kneeling with the Ghana shawl, I believe, on their shoulder
That
and
happened in the
all that.
US, not the UK. So you see why it's
Oh no!
difficult.
It happened here. Yeah.
No,
Well,
I
oh no
mean,
no oh no! The Ghana show was in the
yeah, the
US, but
Kente thing.
but there were aliens in the UK
There were
as well.
kneelings as well, like as at the start of Premier League football games, all of that. So I'm
So
not.
it's just that 5 years later, do we still have? Could we still have another protest if yet another black person is shot and killed in the US?
Yes,
Are the embers not
the
cold? Are
embers
they
are
just
still there
they're
because
still warm?
the system has not changed. It's not become, and I think something that people need to understand is you look at it from the point of view of someone who has enjoyed a lot of privileges, and this is centuries of privileges. When you try to equalize the game, to him, it looks like you're taking away his rights. So one of the things, and this is something I said in I think I've said in the last two episodes, is we always need to learn to flip the conversation and look at it from the viewpoint of the person, of the adversary or the antagonist or the opponent, however way you want to look at it. Because it's having there is having an idea of his own viewpoint that gives you a better position or a better strategy in which to approach the conversation. A lot of the pushback, the white lash that we're seeing, the rise of MAGA, the rise of racism here in the UK, the rise of the far right in Europe, and all of that is as a result of people feeling that their own rights are being taken away and given to these undeserving, in quotes, people.
In fact, that's actually quite an interesting conversation to have, and perhaps, just to segue a bit, do you believe, because I have this belief or theory that this yes, we have racism as an underlying structure of the far right movement, but is it possible that in some way the far right movement is a direct response to the far or to the left taking things a bit too far?
I think they feed off each other. Personally, I'm very centrist. So, for example, if things were normal, I would have been in the opposing party to you. I would have been conservative because I'm socially liberal, but economically I'm conservative. If the parties had remained the way they were when they were set up, which is around political economy, I would have definitely been conservative. But things have shifted.
I think you will find that, interestingly, a lot of Nigerians, a lot of Africans, in some weird way, would have found themselves in the Conservative Party if things were still are the way they were when they were set up. Because apart from just the economics of it, socially as well, a lot of us are socially conservative.
A lot of us are socially conservative. So let's move socially a bit. I think, and so this is drilling down into our own differences, which a lot of white people don't look at. So, for example, I always laugh when let's go back about 10 years now when Hillary Clinton lost to Trump the first time around, and people were shocked to see that some black people voted for Trump even then. And I was like, yes, because these black people, many of them, for example, were Igbo people. Now, your average Igbo person is hardwired to be small governments. It's our culture. He prefers small governments. He prefers less taxation. he prefers socially conservative causes. So the things, remove the racism and the things that the Republicans say in the United States are music to his ears.
I mean, when
It's
you
not an accident that in the UK, when you think about it, a lot of our politicians or our people who came here are on the right of the Labour Party, because the Labour Party has the reputation of being more welcoming to immigrants. But with the exception of Chuka Umuna, the people who have risen very high, and I'm not talking of people from the Caribbean, I'm talking of Africans.
yeah,
The Africans who have risen within party politics here, with the exception of Chuka Umuna, and the argument can be made that Chuka Umuna is, I mean, his mom, I think, is English, so it means that he was raised with sort of like an English outlook. The argument can be made that when you look at the Kemi Badenochs, you look at what was this guy Abim Bola, and he
yeah.
was MP for I think Buckinghamshire. I'm not too clear on that. When you look at those things, you look at the people who went furthest within their parties seem to tend to be conservative. So when people
That,
look at it, there's a tendency to put all black people or all Africans in the same bucket. We are not. We all have our differences, and a lot of those differences are cultural as well.
and even to back your point about the tax, when you think about it, especially in the East, in
In
Abia
eastern
State,
Nigeria,
in East, yeah, sorry, in Eastern Nigeria, the first airport in what is now Abia State was a community effort. People put
yes.
money together. It wasn't a government. Well, it wasn't
I mean,
fully a government thing.
If Simon Mbakwe's government had said, "We are going to pay these taxes, let us build the airport as a result," nobody would have
Nobody
come.
would
When they said, "Okay, we will provide the land, you people go and gather the money
build the
together
airport. Yeah,
yourselves, build the airport," it got done.
yeah, if you come to Abriba, a lot of from the hospital to the library to the schools, these were all built by the community. Think about the about women uprising. It was against excessive taxation. So there's
Yes.
always been that thing of wanting to have the government stay out of our
Out
lives
of our
as much as
business
is
as much as
possible.
possible.
We will take care of things, and it's quite interesting when you look at it that way. And of course, when you also look at the experience of people from African heritage communities with the government in whatever guise it is, whether it's the colonial government or what came after, there's always been that distrust of having that big brother look over you, watching every single thing you're doing, or even in some cases raising your family. No, what you want to do is take care of the essential things, take care of the security, oversee the economy. But you know what? We have our ways of doing things with an understanding of our cultural beliefs, with an understanding of our heritage. And if we have to pay you something at the end of the day as taxation, yes, as long as it's not too much, we will, but just stay out of our business. So I do agree with you. What we'll do, Chata, is we'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the role of the media in shaping narrative, especially around issues of race relations, and how things can move forward.
All right, no problem.
Welcome back to the Black Paper. I'm Ndukwe Onoha.
And I'm Sheta Wanzi.
All right, Cheta, so just before the break, we were talking about, well, generally about the Black Lives Matter protests and how they spilled into the UK. And then somehow we went across the Atlantic to the US, talked about colonialism, came back here. But now I want to focus on how or if the institutions of society, the institutions of the media, of the press, of advertising even, do they help hold up a system where one set of people are always going to have the upper hand, or is it all in our heads?
I think so. First things first, it's important to point out that it was a newspaper that published the investigation which sparked this conversation. And the newspaper did the job that the media is supposed to do. They gave us the fact that even though there are superficial improvements in the experience of the black person in the UK, that there are still a lot of systemic disparities. So, as an example, a black person, especially in London, is about 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched than a white person. Um, but they were very clear that the rates are down from pre 2020. I think the one that stuck out at me in the UK is the fact that black people are 7.5 times more likely to have a gun pointed at them by police in the UK. And I was like, whoa, that's mean it's very difficult. It's rare to see a British police officer carrying a gun on the street. So that statistic um, uh, really jumped out. Another one that jumps out because it's similar but not as bad as the United States is that black mothers are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. In the US, I think it's 9 times. Don't quote me on that, but it's significantly higher. And black people are disproportionately more detained under the Mental Health Act here. And then minorities, not just black people, but minority ethnics, black African, and minority ethnic, I think Asians, they report poorer GP communication. So it's important that to point out that a section of media has done its job, and it's important to point out the leaning of that media, that section of the media, which is left leaning. Left leaning generally tends to be more socially liberal. So the media's job is to bring these issues out so that they can be discussed very, very openly, so that they can be heard. I think Guardian did his job. We have to point out that there's right-wing media that actually goes about trying to pretend that these issues don't exist.
No, but more than pretending that they don't exist, they try to convince us forcefully that we're the ones causing the problem. So I'll give you an
That they
example.
try to gaslight us.
Yeah. So during the protests, because what I did was to look at compare headlines from both sides of the media landscape. So you would have the left-leaning media say things like, or have headlines like, "Now is the time. London's Black Lives Matter rally looks like a turning point. Silence is violence." But then you have the right-leaning media go say things like, "Statue of slave trader Edward Colston is torn down and dumped in harbor by protesters. Taking the knee is a symbol of subjugation and subordination." And we see this. It almost seems that when it comes, no, not almost, it is there now that when it comes to any issue, it doesn't matter what issue it is, take 9 a.m. tomorrow. Depending on which side of the press someone leans towards, it's always going to be one, an opinion piece, almost not anchored in fact, fighting to sell a narrative. And incredibly, you can't with hand on heart say, well, there's a free media anymore, or there's a neutral media
Neutral
anymore.
is the word you're looking for.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that has become a problem in the West generally, in America especially, but it has so the media around the Western world no longer speaks. So I've seen, and again, because I did media studies as a course
And you
when I
were
took my
a journalist at some point.
journalist training. Don't forget that I started out life as an engineer. But when I took my journalist training, I did media studies and we studied the media landscape. And it was very interesting to find that in somewhere like in the United States, I will keep saying that whatever happens in the United States has a way of spreading around, especially the Western world, but the world writ large. Up until about the time of President Reagan, if you turned on the 9 o'clock news anywhere in the United States, whatever station you were turning on, we're certain that you would hear roughly the same thing throughout. So there was everybody agreed on what the facts were. That has slowly, after the Reagan government liberalized the media, the rise of Fox News and then the right wing media, that has slowly died. So I'll give an example. Just 2 weeks ago, tomorrow, 2 weeks ago today, actually, when I landed in Houston, I was trying to adjust to the time zone, and that was the day the news about Biden's prostate cancer diagnosis broke. So as I tend to do whenever I get to the US, I do it for fun, but it's always very instructive. I turned on Fox News, listened for it to an hour. They were talking about the prostate cancer diagnosis. Then I changed to CNN. They were talking about the same thing, but these guys were from different planets. That kind of different media landscape is slowly creeping up here in the UK. It's slowly becoming it. So somebody who spends his entire time watching GB News, as an example, is going to have a completely different a completely different opinion from somebody who spends his time watching Novara Media, because they are watching
There are two. I mean,
different sets of facts.
it's two sides of. It's not even the same coin anymore.
It's not the same coin. It's two different planets. So these are two ends of the spectrum. And unfortunately, it's not helped by, and I would say it very clearly, the cowardice of media outlets like the BBC. The BBC spends too much time trying to be balanced. See, it's this simple. As a journalist, if two people come and one person says it is raining outside, and the other person says, oh, it's not raining, your job is not to air both sides of the divide. It's not everything that you both sides. Your job is to open the bloody window, look outside, and say, is it raining or not?
No, yeah.
But what the BBC tends to do, and this is one of the things that is contributing to the toxic climate in this country, is that they tend to platform everybody. Both sides have no, both sides do not always, should not always have the chance to. You should be able to say this side is telling bloody lies. We are not going to give them air. It's that simple.
It's and that's true. But even away from the media, when you look at the pillars that shape narratives, of course, the media is one of them. But in looking at this topic and getting ready for this podcast, I because in some ways and form I'm still in advertising, I looked at just how advertising also contributes to the shaping of narrative and how it seems to be important that in quote only the right people are in the room to tell the stories. Now, if you go back to the murder of George Floyd, a lot of ad agencies seem to have profited from the virtue signaling. To say, this is bad and this is what we're going to do. We're going to add a lot more black top executives to our agencies and all that.
And then when Trump came back in 2025, they quietly let go of all of those things.
Every, but I was looking at that and I happened upon the I don't know if you remember this Gravy Song Sainsbury's Christmas ad from 2020.
No,
So it's an interesting. So think about
maybe I should go and wake my daughter so that she will probably know it. I don't.
it was an interesting ad that showed just family a family reliving its Christmas memories through old footage and voiceover of. Now, to set the scene, there were two ads in the campaign, or at least that I remember that I saw. One featured a black family, the other featured a white family. So you have this voiceover of people on the phone having a conversation about just their lives and what Christmas means to them through memories. But the interesting thing is, the one with the black family got so much backlash that Sainsbury's had to turn the comments off on the video. The one with the white family, the comments are still on, and people going on, oh, this is brilliant, this is great. But it's just so interesting how the sector that's supposed to be a reflection of life in as we see it in society is all either being bullied or is somehow taking a stance in how they enable or not enable, whether we want to call it systemic racism or whether we want to call it just the fact of life in the UK. But I just wanted to speak about that, about how these guys that are on our phones, in our living rooms, on our tabs every day, selling things to us, are also in one way or the other complicit in what we begin to accept as either a fact of life or how things could be.
I think that's an interesting point, but I would like to take it slightly further. Not many people can take the heat when it gets too hot. We must always remember that. And I think that I tend when it comes to things that have to do with change, I tend to prefer a gradualist approach as opposed to a sudden approach, because a gradualist approach is so think of it kind of like the boiling frog. You are less likely to see resistance when change happens gradually. One of the things that definitely happened with the post Black Lives Matter protest is that a lot of the changes were just sudden. It was guaranteed to bring a backlash
Mm.
because of these sudden changes. So suddenly, so one example I would give is the conversation around James Bond and the fact that
Well,
they started having
uh,
discussions about a black James Bond, a black Bond, or a female Bond. Now we all want diversity. As Nigerians, it's interesting, and I think we should have a small segue into some similarities between the whole UK experience and Nigerian experience, we should know representation is important. It's important for our children who are growing up in this environment to be able to see people that look like them making progress. It gives them role models. So that's very important. However, the degree. So when you suddenly have, take as an example, the movie or the series Rings of Power, suddenly having black people in Middle Earth, it's like, no, that's not the way Tolkien conceived of it. So we don't need that. In short, in my view, that's tokenism. I would quote the former Guardian columnist Gary Young, who pointed out something very powerful in a recent speech that he gave, I think last week, where he said it appears to be more important to have black people in front of the cameras rather than behind. And he said something that really struck me. You have more black people do better on BBC TV than on BBC Radio. I had it had never occurred to me.
That's
Why do they do better
interesting.
on BBC TV? Because they can be seen. But are they in decision making positions? No, they are not. It's just positions that they can be seen. And the Americans have a very good expression for that kind of thing. Token black.
Mm.
On radio, where it's just voices that you hear, people don't see, it's not visual, black people don't do as well. So we don't want tokenism. It's kind of like going back to our country, the old country, where you have a few, so for example, in Tinubu's media team, you have what's his name? Frederick Wampufo, and then they will say, oh, but he appointed an Igbo person. It doesn't work. That's tokenism.
Why is it always media though? I don't know if you've noticed.
In Nigeria, it's visibility. When you have a spokesperson, he's visible.
So you can always point to, oh
So
yeah,
you can always point to
I
him and
have a
say
black
yes.
friend.
Yeah, and now speaking of Nigeria, I think it's very, very instructive that the NSAS protest happened soon after the Black Lives Matter protest in this part of the world. And it was end of the NSAS protest, the brutal crackdown, the brutal Lekki massacre, that actually prompted the wave of mass emigration we saw from Nigeria.
True that.
Nigeria lost, I think, 15,000 doctors or thereabouts to the US, Canada, and the UK, starting between 2016 and 2023, according to the Nigerian Medical Association. But the bulk of those people left after October 2020.
Yeah.
After October 2020, yes, applications for UK skilled worker visas from Nigeria went up by 368%. This is a study that my organization did. I think there's something to be said about the role that protests play, huge protests play in shaping a society and the reaction to those protests from an official point of view. Whatever I want to say, and this brings us back to where we started from with regards to committees, setting up of committees by the UK and Nigeria. In Nigeria, state government set up committees after the NSAS protest. What has become of them?
So I think for me, and this is sad, but it's the fact that you don't really expect anything from any of those committees. So you're like, yeah, they set up a committee, right? I don't even know why
It's something we all know in Nigeria. Nobody expects anything.
they bothered.
There's a broken thread between the government and the governed in Nigeria.
Yeah.
There's no trust.
There's none.
Don't believe our government officials are saying something. We don't believe it. We
I mean,
default
it's not in
to
Nigeria where we have the official figures, and when government gives us any official figures, you multiply by
4%
three.
employment.
You multiply by three just to be safe, and even then it's still a conservative figure. But so I think the thing is, whilst in Nigeria we set up committees and everyone like, yeah, we don't even know why you bother because who the hell is paying attention. Here there's almost, and maybe it's that thing of where we've been sold a dream that is nothing, it's no other thing but because a committee has been set up, you're thinking to yourself, especially if you're from the home continent and you're looking at these guys as a beacon of responsibility in governance and all that, and you say to yourself, surely these committees ought to amount to something. Surely something will happen that is a bit different than we're used to. So when it doesn't happen, you're looking at it and you're like, again, why bother? It breaks down the trust between the people and the government, especially if you're coming from the African continent where there already is no trust. Then you come here where you're not seen, where the political climate seems to be one where you are blamed by all corners for every single thing that is wrong in the country. This happens, you think someone's going to speak up for you, no one does. A committee over 4 decades, 600 recommendations, only a third or about a third implemented, and you're sat there. And then I come along, for instance, as a counselor, as a labor counselor, and I'm saying to you, vote for us, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and you're looking at me
And
like,
then your Labour Prime Minister gives a white paper that's clearly attacks us.
I walked into that, didn't I? Yeah, yeah. But the thing is, but it's true. And then you're sat down, there's egg on your face, and you're talking to a community who has seen they've seen this movie before, they're just seeing a new iteration of this movie, and you can't say anything to them to get them to trust or believe that there's someone who thinks that they matter, and it's sad.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, there isn't much to add to that from my point of view. You said everything. We're coming from a low trust society, and coming into a low trust situation in a society that we've been raised to believe is high trust.
Mm.
And it's one of the things that, as Africans, as African expats in this part of the world, we will have to navigate the erosion of trust in societies that we have believed for a very long time are high trust societies. It's clear that trust in these societies, societal cohesion is on the decline. What is the way forward?
In
That's the
fact,
question.
yes, I was about to ask what is to be done, because let's also, the argument I always make to people who say to me, look, Ndukwe, we understand what you're trying to do, your hearts, but look, there's no need. But I say to them, if we're not visible, we're not vote worthy.
Yes, I
There's that
completely
saying,
agree with you.
yeah,
We can't afford not to
we
participate in
can't.
political process.
We just need to find out how.
And I think it starts it I so I think it's about identifying the pitfalls. When we start to organize better and people like you keep going through the political system, there will be a backlash. You will become a target. It's important to point that out. I think that both parts of the world, the West, the UK, and Nigeria, Africa, share a toxic legacy. A lot of the institutions in this part of the world were built on the oppression, racialized oppression of people from our part of the world. Many of these institutions, especially in countries like the UK now, feign progress but still quietly uphold oppression. I think that the way our countries were constructed was, when I say our countries, African countries, but was based on oppression and, an extractive economic system, which has not changed. For many Nigerians, the answer to that is to emigrate, especially Nigerians who can afford it. One thing that a lot of people do not understand in this part of the world is that migration, legal migration, is very expensive. The fact that you have a high number of Nigerian professionals, I talked about 15,000 doctors leaving the country in a 7 year period. The fact that you have such a high number of professionals is an indictment of the Nigerian system. And on the part of the people who choose to leave, it's a gamble on systems outside of the country, which, in a way that we do not see, actually replicate the same biases that we're running from. So the question is not just whether the UK or Nigeria or any other country will change. I think the real question is whether global power structures will ever get to a point where they feel that justice is more of a priority than optics. Because think about it. Up until now, have we gotten justice for? So you could say that George Floyd has gotten some justice. It was George Floyd's killing that sparked the Black Lives Matter protest. There's been some justice. Derek Chauvin has been sent to jail. But when you think of Trayvon Martin, you think of so many other cases. Has there been justice? The people who amplified, and I wasn't around when it happened. I was in Nigeria. That's the riots last year in the UK. I was in Nigeria. My wife was here, and I kept panicking. Like, I hope this doesn't blow out of proportion. Now, the people who amplified that, has justice really been served? I know that a lot of them have been sent off to jail, but those were foot soldiers. The people who really had the power, have they been justice been served? That's a question, because as long as those people do not face justice, we'll keep coming back to these issues. But one of the places where the system in the UK, and I must commend that, attempts to compensate for these kind of things is, think about the recent attack in Liverpool when a car drove into a crowd celebrating Liverpool's title win.
Yeah.
Immediately, there was every effort. So that was an acknowledgement. That's immediately releasing the fact that they had arrested a white male, a middle-aged white male. That was an
You know,
acknowledgement of the fact that there could be a problem if they didn't.
oh, definitely. Because
Yeah.
the thing
So
is, if you had gone online already, it was already kicking off. There were already speculations. Everyone knew who people were talking about. And you know, I'll tell you something. There were a few incidents of knife violence in Derby as well. And as a black person, I sort of like, oh my God, please don't tell me it has to do with someone from the community because I know what it's going to be like online. It's sad that these are some of the considerations when you hear, you're not thinking, oh God, this has happened. Of course, you're thinking this is bad. This should not happen. But then you're also thinking, what could be the fallout of this? Is someone from the community going to then feel or have that target on their back now because some guy has gone and committed a mindless crime? You know, so it's sad how those tensions are still there. And of course, when you listen to some people who make it their
make money out of it.
yeah, and
Essentially,
almost make it
grifters.
their life point to just stir up racial tension, and you know, and they see it somehow as their route to power, and this then fans a base of just people waiting to jump on the race bandwagon. It makes it such that there's that discomfort of just being able to want to live your life without any problem, without any issues. And sadly, we're here again, yet again. It's an uncomfortable place to be in.
Yeah, very uncomfortable.
Oh well, I don't know how I always just manage to sort of like sour the spirits, but I apologize. I promise next one will be better. Next one will end on a very happy note.
Are you willing to put money on it?
No.
It is fun.
Anyway, thank you very much, Cheta.
Thank you for having me.
It's been
Yes,
interesting,
okay.
and
You said I shouldn't say that again.
it's our podcast, so I don't know why you just keep saying that.
I am being polite now. I'm a well brought up people, boy.
Ah, yes. So what do you remember from the US?
Let's take that conversation off now.
I know worries, man. I'll see you at the next one.
All right then.
Thank
Have
you.
a good. Have a
You too, bro.